Welcome to Albuquerque Real Estate Talk, episode 496. It is the end of June 2024. All right, Tracy, I want to jump to the Realtor Commission Lawsuit Settlement. I don't want to go into the backstory too much because there's too much to unwrap there and there's a lot going on. But if you've been paying attention to real estate and real estate news, you'll know that there was a big lawsuit regarding the National Association of Realtors, and the National Association has this big settlement. And along with that are rule changes and practice changes that relate to how we do real estate as realtors and how we interact with buyers and sellers.
And that's not final yet. There's still, it,
It's final. It's final.
there's still a date in July where they have to finalize it, and there's a date where it's getting implemented. So
Yeah,
just to be
I guess
clear.
my point is there's people saying, oh, it could still change. No, that what the rules are going to be is pretty much set. I think people need to understand as a seller and a buyer how they can deal with this. So as a seller, the main thing that's going to change for you as a seller is when, at least for now, and this is going to change in August here in Albuquerque, when you list your property for sale, we as a brokerage charge a fee to do that, right? We get paid to do it, and we get paid once it sells, right? We do all this work up front, we do all this stuff to get it sold, and then we take a fee. Well, the way that has normally worked is the seller, through the listing broker, would offer some sort of compensation to the buyer broker that helps the buyer. And that was the hang up, and that's why the lawsuit was a problem. And that's what actually triggered the lawsuit is why are sellers having to pay for the buyer broker fee? Well, what's going to happen is the seller is no longer going to be able to offer a compensation to the buyer broker in the multiple listing service. The seller can still offer it. They just can't offer it in the multiple listing service.
As in, we can't publicly put it, not publicly, we can't put it in that multiple listing service, which we call the MLS. It
Right.
won't be just visible there. When I go to show a house, I won't know automatically how much that seller is willing to compensate a buyer broker.
Correct. Exactly. And so what sellers need to think about is, do they want to offer something? Do they want to offer, let's call it a buyer concession, right? Do they want to offer something to encourage a buyer to come and see their home? Think of it as more of a marketing strategy. It's like, okay, I'm listing my home for sale. I'm gonna pay you, listing broker, whatever the number is, right? A percentage or a dollar amount, whatever it is, it's all negotiable. And then do I want to offer something to a buyer to use for their closing costs? Not the buyer broker. We're just talking about, something the buyer broker. So that's one thing sellers have to talk about. And that's something you need to consult your realtor with when you're getting ready to sell your property.
And I just want to clarify, when you say it's all negotiable, as in from realtor to realtor to realtor or licensed real estate
Right.
broker, each person gets to set their own.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't mean that everything I'm going to do is negotiable.
Oh yeah. No. Yeah. We all get to set our fees, whatever our fees are. There's
Right.
no
National
mandatory.
yeah.
Yeah. No. There's no set fees or anything like that. In fact, that's strictly prohibited within our organization, right? You can't set fees. Now, and have a lot of people tried different ways and different practices and different fee models? Absolutely. It's been tried and tried and tried. So yes, the commissions have been negotiable.
Yeah, but
Anyway, yeah.
it's person to person deciding what they want to charge. There isn't a national, this is what we charge as realtors.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Just to be clear.
So buyers, this is where it's changing substantially. Is so when you're right now, if you're a buyer, you're looking to buy a house, you connect with a realtor through whatever it is. And generally you do a little consultation, you talk about what you're looking for, and you start maybe looking at properties online. And at some point you decide, okay, I want to go look at some houses. I want to go inside the house and look at it, right? And there's no requirement to have any type of agreement in place to go look at a home.
Unlike when we work with a home seller, we have to have a written agreement to represent their house.
Correct. Correct. There was no requirement that there was some sort of agreement between a buyer broker who's taking care of the buyer and the buyer, right? Well, that's changing. And that's the thing that's changing the most is that going forward, if you're going to be buying a house, working with a realtor, you're going to need to do a couple things. One, establish that relationship and establish what that fee that the buyer broker is going to charge you, the buyer, to help them purchase a home. And that has to be done in writing prior to looking at any homes. There's a lot to unpack there, but the short of it is if you're buying a house, you're going to have to sign an agreement. You're going to have to agree on how much you're going to pay the buyer broker. And you have to do that before you look at homes.
I thought the compensation part was separate from agreeing to look at homes.
No, you have to agree on what the compensation is upfront. That was part of the settlement because the lawsuit alleged that there was price fixing, right? Which, that I don't want to go down that road. And if it's true or not, doesn't matter, right? This is where we are now. The thing is that now the buyer gets to negotiate what the fee they're willing to pay their buyer broker prior to going and looking at homes. It's not going to be that whole just call up a broker one day and say, "Hey, I want to go start looking at homes." You have to establish a written agreement between you, the buyer, and the buyer broker before you start looking at homes. Now, the exception to that would be open houses. You don't have to have that agreement just to go look at an open house because the agent that's there, or the broker, I should say, we're not agents in New Mexico generally. The broker that's at that open house is representing the seller. So they can show it to you, but they don't represent you, the buyer, to come through and look at the house. This is going to go into effect August 1st in the Albuquerque area, and there's going to be a lot of confusion. I'm out there actually teaching this class. I'm one of the ones out there training and talking about this so that the professionals understand it. It's a very drastic change on how we've done business. Just be aware of it. And if you know anybody that's buying or selling, make sure they're talking with their realtor about this and how it impacts their buying and selling.
Okay, to just add insight from showing a lot of homes on my side, it
How many homes do you think you've shown over the years?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we've sold thousands of houses as a team,
Yeah.
so just this year, I've shown a lot of houses.
Yeah.
So, to be clear for the people who wanna go buy a house, and just to kinda clarify, so you and I sit down, you wanna buy a house, we agree we're gonna work together, we agree how much I'm gonna get paid, and then when I'm gonna go show a house, I'm gonna be calling the other realtor and saying, "Is the seller offering any concession for the buyer?" So that the buyer can choose how to use that concession money, which could be for paying their buyer broker.
Yeah. So that's
It's
the
just making it a little bit more
Yeah, let's
confusing.
actually let's close that loop because okay, so now you as the buyer, you're saying, okay, I'll pay you blank whatever, a percentage or a dollar amount, whatever, to help me buy a house. But I don't have any money as a buyer. I'm like going, well, I've got enough for my down payment, maybe a little bit for closing costs, but that's it. Now it's up to the buyer broker to try to negotiate that fee as part of the
The
purchase of
purchase.
the property, right? So there's a lot of extra negotiations that are going to be happening that didn't necessarily happen in the past. So having a realtor that's got good negotiating skills is going to be more important now than ever because that's part of the deal. Is like, okay, if I'm a buyer, I don't have the money to really get representation, but I really want representation. Now that broker is going to have to try to get that figured into the deal as part of the agreement.
So it's gonna right now, it's nice because we already have that. It's already set aside. We know what's being offered,
Right.
and it's going to be, like you said, a negotiation now. So in addition to the complexities of negotiating an offer for your buyer, we also have to be negotiating perhaps the concessions for them to be able to compensate to have representation.
And let's define concessions because we've thrown that term out a couple times. Concessions is when a seller says, "I will pay X amount toward the buyer's closing costs," and that could be anything from rate buy down for your interest. It could be inspections. It could be a lot of things. There's limits on how much a seller can contribute to the buyer's closing costs
Based on types of loans.
based on types of loans. And one of those fees could be the buyer broker's fee as well, their professional fee. So anyway, that's one of the just to understand when we talking about concessions, what that means.
So in my mind, Tego, sorry, I'm going to go here. So in my mind, there's this big lawsuit, and all it's doing is harming the public, in my opinion. It's making it much harder for home buyers.
In my humble opinion, the only people that have won in this settlement, this class act, it was a class action lawsuit and a settlement. Class was brought by home sellers, right? So there's a whole bunch of home sellers that are part of the class. They're going to get a few bucks out of this thing. It's $418 million is a settlement. Most of that money is going to go to the lawyers for that class.
So you're saying it's the lawyers who won.
Yeah,
The lawyers won.
the lawyers are the big winners.
Yeah.
Now, we can debate if the business practices needed to change anyway, and maybe they did, but the settlement itself really was a big win for lawyers. And the biggest thing I'm concerned about, especially here in New Mexico, where we're not the richest state in the country, let's just be honest, is that buyers are going to not have representation. The buyers are going to go it alone, and they can do that. They can go directly to the listing broker of the property and work directly with that listing broker and go totally unrepresented.
But the
Meaning,
listing broker doesn't represent them, doesn't help them. The
correct,
listing broker still has an obligation to get the most and the best deal for the seller,
for the seller. Right. They don't have
unless
to
they agree
advise
to
them
work
on inspections. They don't have to advise them on
contracts.
contracts. They don't have to help them, through the whole process. And what did I say? There's like 12 different contingencies in a purchase agreement. There's 48 different dates and deadlines that have to be kept track of. And if you miss some of those dates or deadlines, you're in default of contract. I mean, there's so many things that if you don't do this every day, it can really be a problem for you as a buyer.
Right. So buyers are going to be the losers, really. It
Well, if okay,
could
so
be.
yeah, let's finish that. So they could be in the sense that if you're let's say, tight on a budget, first time home buyer, and you don't know the process at all, but you really don't have money to compensate your buyer broker. But you want to buy a house, you go directly to an open house and say, I want this house. And the listing agent says, okay, do you want me to represent you? Which they could do.
And they could ask for a fee.
And they would ask for a fee, or they may or may not, right? That again, it's negotiable. But now they're working for both sides, right? It is allowed in New Mexico. Many states it's not allowed. You can't represent both sides of the transaction, but it is allowed here. So anyway, or the buyer could go, well, you know what? I'm going to do it myself. Now the buyer is they're on their own, and they could do that, but they're on their own. Thanks for watching the video all the way to the end. We appreciate you. And please click subscribe. We'll keep you updated on what's going on with real estate in the Albuquerque area and New Mexico, and of course, across the entire country. Have a great one.